right, we are in a chapter 14, environmental health and toxicology. The case study goes into BPA, and BPA is in many products. It leaches into our bodies through whatever liquid or food might be in the plastic that contains the BPA. It's something that's been banned by a lot of European countries. We are slow to get on the bandwagon, but we definitely have banned it from all children's products, so bottles and everything else like that, just to keep it out of our systems. I'm going to keep moving along. One of the big things to know is infectious diseases, which are area also called communicable or transmissible diseases, and these are diseases that can be passed from person to person. Know the word vector, and vectors are things that pass a disease or a pathogen, which is something that causes a disease. So rats or mosquitoes transmit bubonic plague or the Zika and malaria. They're the vectors for those particular pathogens. Again, a pathogen is going to adapt to new opportunities to infect and spread through human populations. Anything that causes a disease or illness. They can occur in many environments. Cause and effect between humans and pollutants is an issue as well. It's hard due to an increase in chemicals and pollutants that we are seeing within society as well these days. So on these charts, we have the leading causes of death around the world. So we have cardiovascular being the largest in the United States and developed countries. If you look at just the US, cancer is becoming close. It's catching up to cardiovascular disease. Due to better medicine, though, we are starting to see that cardiovascular disease is actually starting to decrease in recent years. In developing countries, the leading cause of death is infectious disease, and that's due to lack of vaccinations, medical services, poor water quality, stuff like that might spread those diseases. So if we take a look in here, we have some of the infectious diseases that College Board says you should have an idea of. So the plague is a disease or bacteria that comes from the bite of an infected animal or contracted through fluids. So again, the plague, rats were a big one. If you got bit by a rat or fluid from that area or somebody else who might have had it. Tuberculosis is a bacterial infection. It attacks the lungs and spreads by breathing the bacteria in from bodily fluids. It's a big one with flight. Somebody's coughing on an airplane, stuff like that, it'll spread easily. Malaria is a parasitic disease from the bite of a mosquito. It's usually found in sub-Saharan Africa, but due to the fact that climates are changing and getting warmer, we're starting to see mosquitoes in places carrying malaria that they typically haven't. Same thing with West Nile, which is a virus carried from mosquito bites. We have severe acute respiratory syndrome. SARS basically is what you remember it as, and that's pneumonia from inhaling or touching infected fluids. Middle East respiratory syndrome, that's MRSA, and that's a virus transmitted from animal to human. We have the Zika, which is from mosquito bites, it's a virus. Cholera, which you probably learned about in middle school, it's a bacteria from infected water, so you usually see that in developing countries where water sources and sanitation aren't as good. Dysentery is caused by untreated sewage as well in streams and rivers, so that's another one like cholera we usually see in developing countries. Mesothelioma, it's a lung cancer that comes from asbestos, breathing in the asbestos fibers. And tropospheric ozone increases respiratory problems as well. So some people actually have a hard time, like especially out in LA, where you see a lot more air pollution. So the increased spread of disease with the global air travel, like Ebola when somebody traveled from Africa and brought it to our country, this wouldn't have happened in the past. Bioterrorism is another area of concern we're worried about. We had an anthrax scare after September 11th. People were getting that white powder substance in their mail. The global warming increases disease because those tropical diseases like cholera and malaria start to require warm conditions. So we're seeing them move northward into areas where warming is now happening, and malaria is a protist again, not a bacteria. It's carried by those mosquito vectors. This is also what's going on with Zika as we move locations as well. So ideal conditions for a lot of these are the equatorial climate zones. They spread north and south to the subtropical and temperate zones. Now that vectors are spreading, we're seeing that spread, obviously further north and south. Poverty, low income areas with poor sanitary conditions, equals a lot of contaminated water and the spread of infectious diseases. So you should know toxicology, toxicity, toxicant. So radon is another one. It's a gas that comes out of the bedrock into homes. It can cause cancer. It's a naturally occurring gas that comes from the decay of the earth. We can put in special radon vents into your basement to get rid of that and take it away from the building so it doesn't build up in the house. Lead poisoning, you should know what it is, what it looks like, what it affects. But then we have PBDE. It's a chemical that's used in products that's flame retardant. And they think that slow doses can actually affect the hormonal system. Know what a toxin is. Asbestos, which is an old insulator. It's in older buildings and causes asbestosis, which is a lung damage condition. It's been banned now, but we do have removal in older homes that are like 50 plus years old. As long as it's sealed, it's fine, but it must be removed then if you're doing any construction. Mesothelioma is a lung cancer that's actually caused by asbestos as well. Toxins that can be natural and synthetic is another big area to know. So we have natural, which are poison, oak, poison ivy, stuff that would occur naturally. But we also have artificial toxins, which are made in labs. So think about any chemical can be an artificial toxin at some point. Natural indoor air pollutants are like radon, mold, and dust. Common human air pollutants are insulation, volatile organic chemicals, so VOCs, carpet, formaldehyde, which was the old way that they would preserve science samples. This is the liquid they'd be in. Furniture, upholstery, lead paint, etc. Carbon monoxide is one of those things that's classified as an asphyxiant. So, you can actually suffocate and die because you're not receiving any or enough of the oxygen to carry oxygen around in your red blood cells, essentially. Particulate pollutants include asbestos, dust, or smoke, anything that's going to get caught up in the air. So here's another thing with radon and everything else. Again, that's more naturally occurring. It gets into homes through cracks, leads to lung cancer. It's the second leading cause of lung cancer, actually. Some other air pollutants are carbon monoxide, NOx, SO2, particulates with tobacco, smoke, secondhand smoke, all that stuff. So the figure and caption shows stream water and groundwater has been contaminated with a lot of toxins from pesticides and herbicides. Undeveloped areas would actually have the least amount of contamination. So we see that in these areas. Obviously, more developed areas, we're going to see more runoff of those chemicals into other areas. So we should know that chemicals are in all of our bodies. They've just built up over time. You should also remember Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring and DDT Pesticides. The book led to the banning of DDT as a pesticide in the U.S. It was a big leading cause of that environmental movement. So you should also know carcinogens cause cancer, mutagens cause a genetic mutation in the DNA. Neurotoxins like lead will affect the nervous system. So we've actually had some in Japan, mercury that has been spilled into the bay in Japan. And due to that mercury has led and heavy metals that cause brain damage, neurological liver problems, kidney problems. High amounts will actually cause death. It's a huge issue, particularly in Japan. You should know what allergens are and the pathway inhibitors as well. So those are big things to look at. Another area, more toxins, usually means, higher dose or a higher chance of death, but we actually have opposite effect going on with endocrine disruptors. So endocrine disruptors are chemicals that interfere with the endocrine system. They cause birth defects, developmental disorders, gender imbalance in fish and actually other species. So these endocrine disruptors, again, are the opposite. Regular toxins, typically, the greater the dose, the greater the chances of death. Endocrine disruptors are actually more poisonous at lower doses. So high doses actually cause the immune system to kick in and fight it. Low doses don't affect the immune system, don't tell it to kick in, and so it actually has a greater effect. So every cell you have has receptors for hormones. They have these little receptors. Chemicals come into your body and mimic hormones, and those chemicals would be endocrine disruptors. They get into your body, They mimic the hormones. They go into these receptors and tell the body, hey, you have a job to do, and it's something interesting. They might think this might be why we're seeing a higher rate of cancer or puberty occurring in younger kids, infertility or fertility problems in general. But right now, the laws are written to protect us from higher doses of toxins, so higher death, because again, we think more of like regular toxins. So the law actually needs to be changed to test all toxins and figure out what dosage, whether it be tiny or big, over time is actually going to cause issues and how you should ban those toxins then. So regular toxins will have, again, that larger death at a higher dose. So infertility, death, whatever. Phthalates, these are in soft toys and cosmetics. You have to be careful about what you buy because you don't want to, they don't regulate these chemicals as much. So you could be taking them into your body. Acute versus chronic exposure. Acute is an immediate exposure that causes an immediate problem, and a chronic is a small dose over a long period of time that builds up in your system and then causes the problem over time. Synergistic effects are two ingredients that by themselves will not cause a problem, but when they're actually put together, they can be extremely dangerous. So global distillation is what we see here, and basically it's because of the way our ocean and our atmospheric currents work, chemicals are concentrated more at the northern poles. So we see huge doses of banned chemicals like PCBs and DDT still found in the pole regions. And the animals that are being hunted in those regions for food or survival actually contain those toxins still. And then those individuals in the population that are eating it are taking in the toxins as well. And so we see a higher dose of those chemicals concentrated in the bodies of indigenous people in the pole region, as well as the animals. POPs are persistent organic pollutants. There are synthetic carbon-based molecules like DDT and PCBs that don't break down easily. And they can travel very easily by wind and water because they actually are low in water solubility. So they stick around for quite a long period of time. They are able to accumulate in the fats of most of the organisms that take them in, so they become very toxic because, again, it's difficult for us to get rid of fat, so it sticks around. They also don't break down in water. So know how the POPs actually kind of work and what's the big issue with them. Bioaccumulation and biomagnification are the next big points and purposes. So bioaccumulation is the collection of toxins in the fat tissues of an organism. Think about the things you've accumulated over your lifetime: Beanie Babies, Matchbox cars, whatever. So you're collecting that stuff over time. In this case, it's toxins in your fat tissues. Then they start to become magnified as we go through the food chain. So there might be a couple things in a small fish. Then when that bigger fish eats a lot of small fish, it takes in more toxins. Then when we eat the big fish, we take in all the toxins that fish has acquired. So as we move up a food chain, we actually see more concentration of toxins at the top trophic levels. So DDT, for instance, is something that will accumulate this way. It's transferred through the food web and concentrated highest in bald eagles and osprey. The eggs actually started to thin out, so when mom would sit on the eggs, they'd crack, and the population started to diminish. So this process is also occurring with top predatory fish in the ocean with mercury as well. So tunas and swordfish, we're seeing a higher concentration of mercury in those particular fish. Fish and frogs are indicator species, and they help us figure out if pollutants are in the water because they actually pull in a lot of breathing in water through their skin. So if we see a decline in these populations, we should be concerned. And that kind of leads us to the optimum range for each factor, which is the sustaining homeostasis outside of this range of tolerance. There is a physiological stress, limited growth, reduced reproduction, or death are things that can happen. So ecological tolerance can apply to individuals or to species. And again, it's a range of the conditions like temperature, salinity, sunlight, the organisms are able to take before injury or death is to occur. And again, that's ecological tolerance. Again, applies to both individuals or species. And that leads us into the dose response curve. And this is a curve that's going to show the effect or the mortality rate in a population based on the dose of a drug or toxin. This shows the lethal dose, or the LD50. In a normal toxin, whether it's lead or nicotine, the higher the dose, the higher the deaths at some point. When you kill 50% of the test population, we call that an LD50. So this is the dose that kills 50% of the population. The ED50, ED50 is the affected dose. So the dose when you are affected by something like hair loss, reproductive issues, cancer, problems that don't necessarily kill you. Some toxins have a threshold that is a point where there is no more resistance to a toxin. Then we have deaths that start to begin. So here's the threshold here. No deaths occur until you reach a dosage of this amount. Then we start to see deaths occurring. So that would be your threshold dose. Your LD50 for this one is the dose that would occur when 50% of the population are killed. So a threshold is the dose, again, before the deaths would begin. The higher the LD50 means that you have a low toxicity. So it would take a lot of that particular substance to kill you. But if LD50 is low, the toxin is extremely lethal, and only a small amount can actually cause a bigger chance for death. So you should know the figure and captions of risk and risk management. We know that these chemicals are an issue, so we study the risk management and the risk analysis. We should take something off the market if it only kills 1 in 1 million individuals is typically what the EPA looks for. We look at what causes the most deaths. More people die in car accidents than in planes and stuff like that. So we take a look at risk management when it comes to that. The interesting thing is we become a little bit more irrational with some of our fears. Like, for instance, more people die in car accidents than planes, but yet most people are scared of flying than driving. We put a lot of money into research for some things that we really need to be looking at other stuff, like cheeseburgers, for instance. We should be more scared of a cheeseburger, which is going to cause more heart disease than some of the other stuff we put research in. So humans in general are not always rational with our fears. So we look at risk management and the risk of certain diseases or activities or toxins. So again, we manage, how are we going to manage these risks and what is acceptable for risk? And that's why we use the EPA. We make sure you know the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, and the FDA, and the Food and Drug Administration, the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, and all of those agencies together kind of look and assess risk management. So when we do this with products, there are actually 2 approaches to product testing. In the US, we do the innocent until proven guilty approach. So we create a product, we do preliminary testing on that product, then we quickly put it on the shelves and we realize that it's going to hurt people, and then we recall it. In Europe, they slow roll things. They do more of a precautionary principle approach. And for them, they do rigorous testing ahead of time, find out what the problems might be with the product, and then they don't put the product out there on the market. And they go back, they make adjustments, again, they retest, and if the product is safe, then it goes out. So they adjust the product, or they just don't sell it. It never makes it out there. OSHA is a government organization that looks at occupational safety and health administration, regulates workplace safety. So we have OSHA regulations here at school. We have to be up to date with the chemicals that are in our facility, especially our science labs, know what to do if there's a spill, how to take care of it, all that stuff. TSCA is the Toxic Substance Control Act, and it's a law that requires the EPA to monitor industrial chemicals, just to make sure that everything is good with that. And the last big thing that you should understand is the Stockholm Convention, which occurred in 2003. This was an international treaty that actually banned the Dirty Dozen, and here are the Dirty Dozen. The Dirty Dozen are obviously 12 of the most persistent, like, nasty chemicals that we have going on. So POPs was one. We have DDT, which was banned. We have PCBs, which are banned. You should know a couple of these that were banned. Again, PCBs, DDT, and POPs are some of the bigger ones that we hear about, and dioxins. And that is it.